Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. I met Claire in college, and it wasn't long before I knew I wanted her by my side. She was brilliant, driven, and beautiful in that natural way that made her stand out effortlessly. I was captivated by her energy, her laughter, and the way she seemed to make everything around her brighter. It felt like a dream back then, and after a few years of dating, we got married. It wasn't a flashy wedding, but it was everything we'd wanted. Small, intimate, filled with close friends and family, and fueled by dreams of a future we would build together. In the years that followed, we built a solid life. I landed a stable job in marketing, and Claire started a promising career in project management. We bought a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, planted roots, and settled into a life we were proud of. We worked hard, saved up, and after a few years, the hard work began to pay off. We upgraded to a larger home, started investing, and even began talking about starting a family. Claire and I shared responsibilities. I handled most of the finances, and she managed the day-to-day operations of our lives, organizing social events, keeping up with family, and taking care of the little things that made our lives comfortable. We trusted each other completely. Or at least, I thought we did. The first red flag appeared on a quiet Tuesday evening. We had both come home late from work, and Claire had to leave her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she hopped in the shower. She rarely left her phone unattended, and at the time, I didn't think much of it. I was about to walk out of the kitchen when her phone buzzed. Glancing over, I saw an unfamiliar number flash on the screen with a message preview that read, "Can't wait to see you again." A wave of confusion hit me, but I brushed it off. It could have been a friend or a work colleague, and maybe I was overthinking things. But a gnawing feeling crept into my mind. I'd never felt suspicious of Claire before. I wanted to shrug it off, but curiosity got the best of me. Hesitantly, I unlocked her phone. She hadn't changed her passcode, a small comfort that made me feel a bit guilty as I read the message thread. What I found erased all doubts. It wasn't just a friendly chat. There was a string of affectionate exchanges, plans to meet, inside jokes, and words that felt intimate, words that no one but me should have been reading. My chest tightened, and a hot surge of anger and betrayal rushed through me. The life I thought we'd built together, the trust I'd placed in her, it all felt like a lie. I didn't confront her that night. I was too shocked, too stunned to even know what to say. Instead, I spent the rest of the evening on autopilot, nodding along to her stories from work and pretending to listen as I processed what I'd just seen. She seemed completely oblivious, going about her evening as though nothing was wrong. That night, I lay awake in bed, listening to the quiet of our home, the home we'd shared and filled with memories. I thought about our late nights working together to make ends meet, our quiet mornings drinking coffee on the back porch, the lazy Sundays we'd spent binge-watching TV shows. And now, here I was, blindsided by the realization that my wife was living a double life. Sleep didn't come easily that night, and when it did, my dreams were filled with fragmented images of betrayal, the warmth of our life together replaced by the coldness of her deception. The following days were a blur of routine and suspicion. I paid closer attention to her habits, her excuses for coming home late, the work trips she took that suddenly seemed too frequent, too convenient. She was careful, I'll give her that. She didn't make obvious mistakes, but there were signs if you looked close enough. Her laughter, once natural and spontaneous, felt forced. The small details she used to share about her day were now vague. She had grown distant, yet I hadn't noticed until now. One evening, I watched as she got ready for another work dinner. She looked stunning, dressed in a way that felt different, more deliberate. My gut churned as she kissed me goodbye, promising to be home before it got too late. I wanted to confront her right then, to demand the truth, but I held back. I wasn't ready to face it yet. Part of me still clung to the hope that this was all some misunderstanding, that I was overreacting. After she left, I went through her phone once again. This time, I found myself going deeper, searching for any clue that would confirm my worst fears. And there it was. Her browser history was filled with searches for hotels and local restaurants, places I'd never heard of her mention. I checked our joint credit card statements and saw charges that didn't add up, dinners at upscale places, small gifts bought with no explanation. The truth was glaringly obvious now, and the evidence was undeniable. The anger simmered beneath the surface, but I held it in, channeling it into something else, planning. If she thought I was blind, she was wrong. I wouldn't just walk away from this. She had taken advantage of my trust, and I was going to make sure she understood the consequences of her betrayal. In the days that followed, I started making small, calculated changes. I reviewed our joint accounts, consolidated assets, and quietly moved what was legally mine into separate accounts. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. But I was no longer the man who blindly trusted his wife. I was the man who was preparing for an end she couldn't see coming. A strange calm washed over me in the days after I'd uncovered Claire's betrayal. The initial shock had morphed into something else, a cold resolve that guided each step as I prepared to confront her. I became hyper-aware of everything she said and did, noticing the smallest things I'd once taken for granted. Her excuses, the way she avoided eye contact, her constant checking of the phone that she now kept firmly in her grip, it all painted a clear picture. Each morning, I'd watch her from across the breakfast table, and there would be moments, brief glances, where I'd catch a flicker of something in her eyes. I wondered if she sensed the change in me or if her guilt was finally surfacing. But she'd quickly look away, hiding behind her coffee cup or phone, eager to start her day, to escape. It was as if the woman I'd loved had been replaced by a stranger, someone with secrets and desires that had nothing to do with me. I spent my evenings planning. Every time she was out on one of her so-called work dinners or meetings, I would review our finances, looking for more signs of her duplicity. I knew what I was looking for and, perhaps more importantly, what I needed to secure. As I traced every financial decision we'd made over the years, I realized how much I'd sacrificed, how much I'd been willing to give to build a future with her. I saw the vacations we had planned and never took, the investments we'd made with a mutual future in mind, and the quiet stability we'd both worked so hard for. In those quiet hours, a part of me mourned what I had lost. But that mourning was quickly replaced by a renewed determination. I started making subtle changes in our shared accounts. Small amounts shifted into accounts solely in my name, discrete transactions that wouldn't raise her suspicion but would give me the security I needed. It was a delicate operation, one that required patience and restraint, but I took an almost grim satisfaction in it. This was my revenge, carefully crafted, and I wasn't going to let her take any more from me than she already had. But financial maneuvers were just one part of the equation. I wanted to confront her, to see the look in her eyes when she realized the jig was up, but I held back. I knew the power lay in patience, in making sure everything was in place before I made my move. Instead, I acted as if nothing had changed. I greeted her with the same warmth, asked her about her day, and even planned a dinner together the following weekend, pretending we were still the couple we'd once been. She seemed to relax, thinking she'd covered her tracks well enough, but every time she looked at me with that smile, the one that used to mean the world to me, I felt my resolve harden. One night, she came home later than usual, and I could smell the faint trace of cologne on her clothes, one that wasn't mine. She was clearly nervous, giving me a quick kiss before rushing off to take a shower. I watched her disappear down the hall, and I could feel the anger simmering, but I pushed it down. I would let her have her secrets for just a little longer. A few days later, while she was at work, I decided to check the closet in our guest room. It was a space we rarely used, a place for storing holiday decorations and old family mementos. But something had made me curious about it lately, a hunch that perhaps she was hiding more than just an affair. Sure enough, in the back corner, buried under a stack of old photo albums, I found a small, dusty box. Inside were receipts from upscale restaurants, receipts I had never seen, all signed by her and dated over the past year. They weren't from places we'd gone together. They were from places she'd never even mentioned. Alongside the receipts, I found a jewelry box I'd never seen. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet with an engraving that read, "To Claire, my heart." My mind reeled. Whoever he was, he had given her gifts, taken her to places I'd never heard of, created a life with her that had nothing to do with the one we shared. I put the box back in its hiding place, closed the closet, and left the room feeling more resolved than ever. That weekend, I took Claire to dinner, determined to maintain the illusion of normalcy. I picked her favorite restaurant, the one we'd gone to for our anniversary just the year before. She looked beautiful that night, wearing a dress I'd bought her the previous Christmas. For a moment, I almost forgot what I knew. Almost. But as she laughed and smiled, sipping her wine and telling me about her day, I could see it, the falseness, the distance. She wasn't present, her mind was somewhere else, with someone else. I smiled and nodded, playing my part, even as I felt the sting of her betrayal deep in my chest. At one point during the evening, I looked into her eyes and said, "You know, I love you. I always have." She blinked, taken aback, and for a moment, I thought I saw guilt flicker across her face. She stammered, "I love you too," but her words sounded hollow, forced. It was the confirmation I needed, the last bit of proof that the woman sitting across from me wasn't the Claire I'd married. I felt a strange satisfaction in that moment, a final release of the hope I'd been clinging to. The Claire I had loved was gone, and the only thing left for me to do was finish what I'd started. When we returned home, I went straight to my office, locking the door behind me. I sat at my desk, looking over the files I had compiled, each piece of evidence meticulously documented. The bank statements, the receipts, the records of her time away, all of it laid out like a puzzle I had finally completed. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of it all settle over me. I knew the time had come to confront her, but I also knew that this was about more than just the confrontation. It was about reclaiming my life, about taking back the control I'd lost. I made a decision that night, one that would change everything. I would confront her, yes, but I would do it on my terms. She had taken enough from me. Now it was time for me to show her that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. I didn't know how she would react, but it didn't matter. This was no longer about saving our marriage. It was about ensuring that she faced the consequences of her actions, that she understood what it felt like to lose everything she'd taken for granted. The next morning, as the sun rose, I sat at the kitchen table, my plan fully formed. Claire would face the truth, and she would feel the weight of her decisions. I had put everything in place. The house was secured in my name, our assets had been quietly shifted, and I'd filed the divorce paperwork the night before. But I didn't want to tell her until she was home, under the roof we had once shared. The life we'd built together would end here, on my terms. Claire strolled into the kitchen, dressed and ready for work, coffee in hand, her usual cheerful self. It amazed me how easily she wore that mask, that facade of the devoted wife. If I hadn't known what I did, I might have believed it. But now, her smile, her ease, only fueled the anger that simmered beneath the surface. I forced myself to hold back, not wanting to rush into the confrontation. Timing was everything. "I've got a meeting tonight," she mentioned casually, leaning against the counter, "so I'll be home a little late. Don't wait up, okay?" The irony hit me with full force. All those nights I'd waited, thinking she was putting in extra hours, trying to make life better for us, when really she'd been building a world without me in it. "Sure," I replied with a smile that I'm sure looked as false as hers. "I'll see you whenever you get in." She gave me a quick peck on the cheek and breezed out the door. I waited until I saw her car disappear down the street before grabbing my phone and calling my lawyer. "Today's the day," I told him, feeling a calm certainty take hold. "I'll let her know tonight, and we can move forward from there." That evening, I prepared dinner for myself, alone at our dining table, the same table where we had shared so many meals and conversations. I was halfway through my meal when I heard her car pull into the driveway. The sound of her footsteps, so familiar, filled me with a strange sense of finality. She stepped through the door, her face flushed, her hair slightly disheveled, and that scent, the faint trace of cologne that wasn't mine. "Hey," she said, sounding oddly out of breath. "Sorry I'm late. It was a long day." I looked at her, taking in every detail. How many times had she walked in with that same excuse? How many nights had she been with him while I sat here, trusting her, believing in the future we were supposed to be building together? "Have a seat, Claire," I said, keeping my tone steady. "We need to talk." She froze, her eyes flickering with a brief flash of panic before she covered it with a smile. "Of course," she said, slipping into the seat across from me. "Is everything okay?" I studied her face, the expression I had once adored, now twisted by lies. "No," I replied. "Everything is not okay. And I think it's time we stopped pretending that it is." A flicker of fear crossed her face, but she quickly masked it. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady but guarded. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the confrontation I had rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times. "I know, Claire. I know about him. I know about the work dinners, the trips, the lies. I know everything." Her face went pale, her composure finally cracking. She opened her mouth, a desperate look in her eyes, but no words came. She stared at me, as if searching for some way out, some last bit of leverage to turn the situation in her favor. But she knew, as well as I did, that there was no way out now. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I don't know what happened." "You don't know what happened?" I repeated, my voice thick with disbelief. "We built a life together, Claire. We made promises, we built plans. And you threw it all away. For what?" She looked down, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't know," she said again, sounding hollow, as if even she couldn't believe the choices she had made. I was lonely. I felt like we'd grown apart, and he made me feel something again. I never meant to hurt you. I thought I could keep it separate." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that echoed in the silence. "Keep it separate?" I asked, shaking my head. "That's rich. You kept it separate, all right. Separate from me, from the life we shared. And now you're sorry." Her face twisted, tears starting to well in her eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I wish I could take it all back." "Take it back?" I repeated, the bitterness in my voice sharper than ever. "Claire, this isn't something you can just erase. This isn't a mistake you can apologize for and move on from." She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I know," she whispered, the tears spilling over. "But I love you. I don't want to lose you. Please, let's try to fix this." Her words, her tears, only made me angrier. She didn't understand, didn't realize how deeply she had cut me, how much she had destroyed. She thought that a few tears and an apology would make it all go away, that I'd forgive her, that we'd go back to the way things were. But there was no going back. The life we'd had was gone, shattered by her choices. "Claire," I said, my voice low and unyielding, "there's no fixing this. You made your choice. You knew what you were risking, and you went ahead with it anyway. I'm done." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, don't say that. I'll do anything, anything to make it right." "There's nothing left to make right," I replied coldly. "I've already filed for divorce. The house, the accounts, everything's already settled. I'm moving on." And you're going to have to live with the consequences of what you've done. For a moment, she looked at me as if she didn't recognize me, as if the man in front of her was a stranger. And maybe, in a way, he was. The man who had loved her, who had trusted her, was gone, replaced by someone who could see her for what she truly was. She opened her mouth to argue, to beg, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't," I said. "You don't get to cry, you don't get to beg. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." The silence that filled the room was heavy, suffocating. She sat there, her face pale, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief, and I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. She had finally understood. She had finally seen what her choices had cost her. I stood up, pushing back my chair. "I'll be staying at a hotel tonight," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The lawyer will be in touch. I'd appreciate it if you packed up your things and left by the time I'm back tomorrow. I don't want to see you here again." She didn't respond, just stared at me, her face blank with shock. I picked up my keys and walked to the door, pausing only once to look back at the woman I had once loved. But now, all I felt was a hollow emptiness, a quiet resolve that I had made the right choice. Without another word, I walked out, leaving her sitting in the darkness of our home, alone with the consequences of her betrayal. As I drove away that night, the weight of everything began to settle over me. I felt a hollow relief, a strange calmness, knowing that the worst was finally over. The words I had waited to say for so long had finally been spoken, and Claire had faced the truth. I could start again, rebuild, find a life that no longer revolved around betrayal and lies. But as I checked into the small hotel on the edge of town, I realized the reality of my decision was more overwhelming than I had imagined. I had ended my marriage, left behind a decade of memories, and was alone in a way I hadn't been since I was young. I tried to push away the thoughts, reasoning that it would just take time to adjust. I threw my bag onto the bed and turned on the TV, hoping the noise would drown out the silence, the ache that had started to bloom inside. But no matter how loud the background noise, the memories broke through. I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the love that had once filled the house I had just walked away from. The following morning, my lawyer called. He wanted to confirm that Claire had agreed to the terms, to finalize everything before things got messy. "It's done," I replied, barely recognizing my own voice. The relief I had expected didn't come. Instead, there was only emptiness, a hollow silence that gnawed at me. I told myself it was just a phase, the mourning period of what was lost, but deep down, I wondered if it would ever truly pass. Days blurred into weeks as I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the ache that had settled in my chest. I kept up with friends, went through the motions, and told everyone I was fine, that I had moved on, that I didn't look back. But each night, as I returned to the quiet apartment I had rented downtown, the emptiness crept in like a shadow. I realized then that I hadn't just lost Claire, I'd lost the life we had built, the love I had believed in so completely. One evening, I stopped by a local bar after work, a small, dimly lit place where I could blend into the background. I ordered a drink, letting the quiet murmur of strangers' conversations fill the void, trying to forget the familiar silence waiting for me at home. I had almost finished my second drink when a woman slid onto the bar stool next to me. She was quiet, unassuming, and for a moment, I barely noticed her. But when she spoke, her voice was kind, understanding in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. We talked about work, about life, about everything and nothing at all. Her name was Anna, a schoolteacher in town, and she had a soft way of speaking that felt soothing, even comforting. We didn't touch on the past, but somehow she seemed to understand that I had been through something difficult, that I was struggling with a grief I couldn't shake. And when she offered to meet again, I found myself agreeing, surprised at how much I wanted the company, the warmth of another person. Over the next few weeks, Anna became a small light in the darkness. We'd meet after work, talk about our days, and slowly, she became my confidant. I didn't tell her everything, didn't burden her with the story of Claire and the betrayal, but she knew enough to understand the sadness I carried with me. For the first time, I felt like I was coming back to life, that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild something real again. But life, it seemed, had other plans. One night, I got a call from an unknown number, one that I almost ignored. But something made me answer, a nagging feeling I couldn't shake. It was Claire's mother, her voice shaking, thick with emotion. Claire had been in an accident, she told me, her voice barely a whisper. She'd driven off the road late that night, alone, and the paramedics hadn't been able to revive her. The news hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. I sat in stunned silence, the phone slipping from my hand. The anger, the bitterness, the pain, all of it dissolved in an instant, replaced by a grief so deep it felt like it would swallow me whole. Claire was gone, and with her, any chance of closure, of forgiveness, of peace. I would never have the chance to truly say goodbye. At the funeral, I felt like an outsider, surrounded by people who had loved her, who didn't know the full story, who didn't understand the weight of what had happened between us. I stood by her grave, alone, as they lowered her into the ground, and the finality of it hit me in a way I hadn't expected. Claire, the woman I had loved, the woman who had betrayed me, was gone. And all I could feel was the overwhelming sadness of it, the loss of a life we'd once dreamed of together. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of it all, but the answers never came. The anger I had once clung to felt meaningless now, hollow and empty. The revenge I had meticulously planned, the satisfaction I thought I'd find, it all felt shallow, pointless in the face of her death. I was left with only memories, fragments of a life that had ended too soon, and the realization that forgiveness would have been the only way to truly move on. But now, forgiveness was impossible. The chance to find peace was gone, buried with her, leaving me with nothing but regret. I thought of Anna, of the possibility of a new beginning, but even that felt distant now, overshadowed by the unresolved grief, the haunting emptiness that Claire had left behind. The revenge I had once cherished had turned into a bitter reminder of the life I would never reclaim, a love that had died twice, once with betrayal, and once in the cold permanence of death. And so I was left alone, with the emptiness of my triumph, the hollowness of my victory, and the weight of a loss that would never heal.